Hello and welcome to Emerald Art Radio. I'm one of your hosts, Alan Cox, and it's Friday again, and it seems to come around so quickly. Anyway, it seems like spring might have actually arrived over here. We've had a lovely few days, and the forecast for next week is really nice, so one can only hope. Anyway, it's good to be with you, and on the other end of the line should be my co-host, Dave Ashworth. So welcome, Dave.
Thanks, Alan, and good evening, everybody. Yeah, it's interesting, this spring energy. As some of the people will know, I went away on the 19th of December, and about 2 weeks before that, I felt the energy changing. You can see it in the birds and the activity and the way they're behaving very quickly. And probably over a period of the last 10 years now, I've noticed that the spring energy, even though we're not into winter, the spring energy is coming even before the winter solstice. So that's quite interesting. But what we've been experiencing this week, of course, is another shift. It's the light, the quality of the light is getting better. We had our first daffodil out this week as well, so there's a few flowers out now. And, we had snowdrops before that. And the birds are very busy, the woodpeckers. In fact, we had a buzzard in the garden yesterday, and usually they're very, very skittish. And, you get within 100 meters of them, and they're off. And this buzzard was just sitting in the apple tree about 10 meters away. And it hopped to another tree and was watching me, and I stood watching him. And he hopped off to another tree, and he made 4 moves and then only drifted away gently. So it was really good to see a huge bird of prey in the garden. I'm not sure what the rabbits thought of that, though.
That's true. I mean, it's a very, I think it's a very beautiful time of year, because it's almost like everything is starting to blossom, awaken.
Yeah.
And it's funny that the theme is listening and hearing, because you can hear the birds, but then if you listen to the awakening all around you, although they're connected, they are two different things. Yeah,
absolutely. You know, the Earth Mother begins to stir as the sun starts to come north. And, we're only a couple of weeks away now from the equinox. It doesn't seem 5 minutes since we were going through the solstice. And, the equinox energies are building up. And in 2 weeks' time, the sun will cross the equator. And the southern hemisphere will be going into its autumn. And our spring will be really getting into full swing then. And if you think about an image of the Earth with the equator, say you were looking at the Earth from a distance and you were watching the sun moving north, I feel these energies very, very clearly, the energies of nature. And when that sun rises to that equator, as it's getting very close, and it is now, within the next about 7 days of the equinox, so it's building up now, it's almost like you can feel a switch being thrown very slowly, and as it goes over, within 2 or 3 days of passing the equinox, the whole energy of the planet in the northern hemisphere changes quite dramatically. You really feel the power of that Earth coming up to the surface.
It's a strange time, actually, from late autumn to very early spring. Well, shall we say, I know we're not in spring yet, but as we are now. And that period of time affects quite a lot of people in a kind of a negative way. There are people who can't function properly with the long, dark times, the getting dark at 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon and not getting light till 8, half 8 in the morning. And it does affect some people quite dramatically, really.
Yeah, it's called seasonal affective disorder, and I used to have it many years ago. And there are 2 versions of it. One is light deprivation, and the other is psychological. And I'd had this for years, and it was getting worse and worse and worse. And I got to the point where I was just so depressed, even coming into spring and summer, I was depressed at the thought of the next winter coming, even before we'd had the summer. And I was walking through a bookshop one day, and just this book was calling to me. It had a blue cover, and I picked it up, and I didn't know anything about this seasonal affective disorder. And it had something on the cover which I can't remember now, and it says, do you suffer depression in the winter? And so I bought the book, took it home, and started reading it. And I thought, well, this is what's affecting me. And so I kind of thought, well, it's either psychological or it's the light deprivation. So what I did was I invested in some full spectrum lighting first of all, and I put the lighting on timing switches in the bedroom so it would come on a couple of hours before I would be getting up. And so the light came on and I was drinking in the light, and it didn't make any difference. So I figured out it must be psychological. So I started working then on my consciousness and my thought processes, and I pulled myself out of it. It took me about a year, but at least I knew what it was then. I knew what I had to work on. And once you've figured out which one it is, you can then work on it. If it's light deprivation, then it's easy. You just get full spectrum lighting in and make sure you get plenty of it. Some people actually have a combination of both, light deprivation and psychological.
It's strange, you see, because going back probably 3 or 4 years ago, up until then, I had always used to feel like that. Oh, dread the thought of it getting dark at 4:30 in the afternoon. But this last 2 years, I haven't actually felt like that. It's like my mind has been thinking, well, it won't be that long before it starts getting lighter.
Yeah.
But perhaps there's an inner conscious thought there with me that's thinking, well, why put yourself through the negativity of it? All you've got to do is think positive. The Earth's moving all the time, and it'll soon come back round again.
Yeah, it is when you start becoming really connected with sun cycles and moon cycles. It's amazing how fast things change. You know, if you go back to when you're younger, the summers seem to be kind of endless, and the winter seems to be endless. But I just noticed the changes almost in every day these days. And when we're coming into autumn, particularly, and the sun is well south of the equator, the changes in time between sunsets from day to day is actually quite dramatic. It can be something like 12 minutes a day, I seem to remember.
Yeah.
So that's quite a large difference.
Now, people listening in and now seen the subject about listening and hearing, and saying, well, why are you talking about seasonal? What's that got to do with listening or hearing? But in a sense, I suppose it's listening to ourselves, which is one of the hardest things to do.
Yeah.
And then also, like we touched on, hearing the changes that goes on in nature.
Yeah. Yeah, when I used to do a lot of earth healing work and dowsing work and teaching that kind of thing, and the students would say, well, you know, how do you kind of feel? How do you feel these things that you can feel, Dave? And I used to say, well, it's not so much about feeling them. It's almost like hearing them. I kind of hear them with my heart, or I see them or feel them through the heart. But quite often it's kind of, you know, when you stand still and you're listening for a sound in the distance, like you might hear a bird in the distance and you're trying to hear its song, and you make yourself as quiet as possible. And what I would do is I would stand in that kind of position and I would hear with the heart. It's almost impossible to explain it. You have to experience it to understand it. But this is about, you know, listening and hearing. It's hearing the energy in the landscape and hearing how you're interacting with that within your own being.
So, I suppose sometimes listening can be a lot more difficult than hearing. We can hear lots of different noises, lots of different sounds. Somebody can be talking and you can hear that they're talking, but it's a totally different thing to being able to concentrate and actually take in and listen to either the sounds around or what is being said.
Yeah, well, that's one way of looking at it, and I would immediately turn that round the other way.
Okay.
because quite often we're actually listening to somebody speaking, but we're not hearing them. And, you know, that you find this in a lot of the old spiritual teachings. So, for example, Jesus would say, "He who has ears, let him hear." Not let him listen, let him hear. I'll give you an example of it. I wrote one down earlier. Here's one I prepared earlier, along with the chocolate cakes. His disciples said, "Show us the place where you are, because it is necessary for us to seek after it." He said to them, "He who has ears, let him hear. There is light at the center of a man of light, and he illumines the whole world. If he does not shine, there is darkness." Basically, what he was saying to the disciples there was, you haven't got a clue. I've been talking to you all this time, and you're still clueless.
Yes.
And he's saying, he who has ears, let him hear. And what he's really saying there is, it's almost like saying, open your eyes, open your hearing, open your consciousness, and see what is standing before you. Hear what is standing before you. Perceive what is standing before you. Because you're all tied up in the intellectual aspect of this. You know, show us the place where you are. He's saying, well, me, the man, I'm standing right in front of you, but what you can't see is the light at the center of man. And if you can't see it, then it's covered in darkness, or it's shrouded in darkness. So what he's really saying to the disciples there is, you can't see it because of your own darkness. So you have to work on dissolving the darkness, dissolving the ego, and then you will see and perceive the light. And so when he says, he who has, I can't say this, he who has ears, let him hear. He's basically saying the truth is right in front of you, but you can't perceive it. And when he's kind of appealing them to use their ears, he's saying, hear what I'm saying. You're not looking in the right place.
And sometimes, Dave, even hearing and listening can, how can I put this? Sometimes silence can be as powerful, if not more powerful, than hearing and listening. And I'll just give one example that's happened over the last few days in the Ukraine, in Crimea, when the Ukrainian army, without any weapons, walked right up to the Russian soldiers who had taken over their part of their country, and the Russians had got all the guns, the armament aimed at them, and they just stood there and in silence and stood there for a few minutes, and then they turned around and they all walked back. And in some ways, that made the Russian soldiers hear, but there was no word spoken.
Yeah, that's right. They could hear the message, non-violent action.
Yeah. So really, when you think about it, there's lots of different ways of understanding and receiving a message. And it's not actually always clear cut, is it? How something important gets through to either an individual or a group of people.
That's right. Yeah, and a large part of it is all to do with the a level of consciousness where you can actually hear the message. You know, like that example where Jesus is speaking to the disciples and he's getting a bit fed up with them because he's been talking to them for that long and they can't hear the message. So what we're going through in this particular time, with reference to what's happening in Crimea at the moment, the planetary energies are changing and changing fast. The people who are awakening spiritually know this, and whenever you get the kind of energies which aren't common or often that we experience now in this acceleration period, where we're coming out of one age and entering into another age, what you get is this kind of acceleration taking place. And what the acceleration does is it begins to split the consciousness, the collective consciousness, into two parts. The part that moves quickly and hooks on to the universal consciousness as it's accelerating, that gets uplifted and pulled away from the old paradigm or the old consciousness. And so what we've been seeing very, very clearly over the last few years with, governments being toppled and a complete and utter change in the paradigm of what people actually want. It's the people that have stepped up in Crimea and said, we want some change. We don't want this. And of course, you've got Mr. Putin there, who is the old school. He's not going to change because that is his consciousness. Now, if we had Mr. Gorbachev in there, who we had a few years ago, he was a great man for letting everything go.
Yes.
And what we've got back is in Russia is another member of the old guard or the old thinking. But, as we've seen through this past couple of years with the amount of governments that have been toppled, this is what happens when you get a kind of revolutionary shift in universal consciousness. Did you want to add anything, Alan, to that?
Yeah. I was just thinking actually on what you were saying, and sometimes when change is meant to happen, it goes through a lot of turmoil until eventually the enough people actually hear what is really people really want. So just like that's happened in other countries that have gone through this kind of change, like Egypt and Iraq and that, change was needed, necessary, but it wasn't clear cut. It wasn't a case of, well, that's wrong, we've got rid of those people, so now the next people have come in and we've got it right. It is literally like the Earth spinning on its axis and going from autumn, winter, spring, and then eventually getting to summer. Summer being, okay, we've got it right, but there's different shifts in human behaviour and expectation to get it to the right point.
That's right. We were speaking just before the show came on air, weren't we, Alan, about universal consciousness and this being a year of expansion, and we were both saying we were quite tired at the moment.
Yes.
And I was kind of, often when I'm speaking like this, I'm really looking into the universe, and the guidance is showing me images and pictures of what's actually happening. And although I knew this before because I've been working with these energies for 2 or 3 months now, these particular energies we're in at the moment, while we were talking, it was just showing me again and reinforcing the picture. And back in early December, when I sent out one of the guidance teachings for the period, the guidance was showing me into the universe and said this is moving really, really fast in this first quarter of this year. They said, the energy will be moving really fast right up to the equinox. They didn't take me beyond there, but I can tell now from the momentum in the universe that it's not going to slow down after the equinox. We might get some different patterns that come, but the fundamental baseline speed is still rocketing away. And what we were saying before we came on the air was, it's because this energy is moving so fast, it's pulling through every atom of your being. And those people who are have got a higher vibration, the healers of this world, the spiritual workers, the light workers. Those people with a higher vibration will be more susceptible to feeling this energy than people who are not switched on or awakened yet. And as that energy pulls through every fiber of your being, particularly the molecular structure, the chakras, the aura, for example, all that whole energy system has a lot of work to do, not only to keep up with it, but to actually change and move with the time. So what happens is the vibration in the universe is accelerating very quickly all the time. And the energies within the chakras and the aura are trying to catch up. So it's almost like you're running a race with the universe and you can't quite catch it. And that's what makes the system tired. So another aspect to this is that I've mentioned many times this is a year of expansion. And, these energies are just opening doors right, left and centre for people to explore new things. And so if you're hooked onto this universal wave of time and you've really got your eyes open and you're listening and you're hearing, there'll be a lot of opportunities. And but what you've got to do is kind of make them happen. The universe will tease them, it'll drop them in, but you've got to see them and go for them very quickly. Because if you don't, they will pass you by. Nothing will wait for you in this particular period because it's moving so fast. So you have to move with it. And one of the consequences of that, of course, is you get tired. So you need to think about balancing your lifestyle. I'm continually changing my daily routine to find something that doesn't burn me out, So, I might, when it comes to lunchtime, I'm usually working about 7 in the morning. When it gets to 12:01, I'll take a bit of time out. I'll have a drink and perhaps I'll have a doze on the sofa for 20 minutes just to switch everything off and allow the body to catch up. And I'll do the same again around about 6 or 7 in the evening. Just completely switch off, chill out, have a cup of tea, put the TV on or something, watch something silly, just let it wash over you and let the energies of the day go.
Yeah, that's. I must admit, if I'm on the go all day, I'm out and travelling and whatever, then obviously you can't do it. But I normally find it's around about perhaps 3:30 in the afternoon if I'm at home. Then I sit in the chair and my eyes close and I go somewhere. I'm not quite sure where I go, but I go somewhere. So I do understand. It's just my body clock seems to be. I don't seem to want to eat at what you say is normal times that most people eat. Do you find that?
Yeah, I'm the same. I eat when I'm hungry.
Yeah.
So, I can't remember now. I think it was perhaps yesterday. It came to kind of dinner time. If I'm going to eat a meal in the evening, it's usually between 7 and 8. And I thought, I better start making some food. And I suddenly thought, I'm not hungry at all, so I'm not gonna eat. And that's often a reflection to what's happening energetically outside. When you get the spring energies coming up, you don't need to eat as much, of course. So if you suddenly get a shift, and we've had a couple of really nice days, the sun was out, so there's a lot of energy there. And if you're not working physically, you might find that you don't need to eat as much.
That's right. I don't know if you read that, but Dave's just said that he's had a long day, been awake since 6 o'clock, and he's ready to go to sleep now. So I hope he can last the next half an hour. To finish the show.
You'll be putting us up for a break several times in the last half hour.
That's right. Well, I think we've got just over a minute to go. So, do you want to say how people can find you, Dave?
Yeah. So, emeraldheartlight.com is where you can find us. There's lots of stuff happening on the blog, lots of announcements, teaching dates coming up, and various other things. So get yourself signed onto the blog at emeraldheartlight.com and see what we're up to. Thanks, Alan.
It's okay, and if anybody's interested in checking me out, then they can at calmingthoughts.com. So I think we're virtually on time. Well, Dave says we've got a minute to go, but hey, let's be early for once, shall we?
Yeah. Pull the plug, Dave.
Pull the plug, yeah. He says time's going slow today. We'll see after break. Welcome back to Emerald Art Radio. I'm Alan Cox, and the other half of the show is Dave Ashworth, and Dave should be there. Hi, Dave.
Hi, Alan. Hello, everybody. Yeah, the other half is Ashworth. Cox and Ashworth.
That's it.
The dynamic duo.
Is that right?
So, well, it was a few years ago.
Yes.
Yeah.
Actually, talking about praising yourselves type of thing, many years ago, and on about hearing and listening, and this has stayed with me for the best part of probably 46, 47 years. I was a young teenager working in a furniture store, and we had this semi-retired guy named Percy who used to come in just a couple of days a week and do some French polishing. And I tried to get a scratch out of this sideboard and I made a right mess of it. And he comes in and I said, "Can you do anything about that, please, Percy?" before the manager sees it. And he was brilliant. I mean, he made this scratch into, it looked like a natural knot in the wood when he'd finished.
Yeah.
And I was looking at it and I said, "Percy, that's brilliant. You are absolutely brilliant." He says, "Always remember this, Alan." He says, "Some say good old Percy and there's others that speak the truth." And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that.
Well, there is, yeah. Well, it's interesting on the spiritual path. I mean, there are many sayings about being able to see and hear the truth in the teachings, and a lot of people don't want to hear the truth. And one of the things that comes up very strongly when you're going through conscious transformations is the aspect of your own truth that you've never really connected with, and they come up to the surface, and they can be absolutely horrific. And, you can go through some very, very difficult processes as your own truth comes up. And that might be truth from past lives, for example. And it has to come up and pass through the system. Jesus has many sayings about there is nothing hidden that will not be manifest. And what he's speaking about there is the truth coming up to the surface. You might have gone through life, and I'm sure we all have at some point done something we're not proud of or we feel guilty of, and that will all come back to the surface, even though you may have forgotten it and moved beyond it or buried it so deep you don't think it exists anymore. But as your vibration raises, it'll come bubbling up to the surface, just like something from a swamp being released, an old bit of wood from a swamp being released and coming up to the surface.
There's a lot of truth in that, isn't there? If we don't sort something out, it'll lay dormant, and then it just comes back and just slaps you in the face, type of thing.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and you become more attuned to this as you move through life. And what happens in lots of situations is, somebody will offend somebody, maybe in a small way, and it begins to bother you, and you think, "Oh, well, it's nothing really. I won't make a fuss over it. I won't say anything." And what happens is you actually swallow that. You swallow that injury by trying to hide it rather than saying something. Now, some people are very sharp. They can respond very quickly in a situation and not be attached to the outcome something that might be injurious. You know, somebody might just say something injurious to you, and it hurts the emotions. But other people take longer to process this kind of thing. I do, because I'm a double water sign. So, you know, if somebody hurts me with words, it goes very, very deep. And it takes me maybe 2 or 3 days to process it. But what I learned over the years is, even though it's 2 or 3 days later, I need to come back and say something about that, because otherwise that energy doesn't dissolve. You've absorbed the energy of the injury, and it will harm you at some level if you don't get it back out by, you know, going back to that person and saying, look, can I just have a quiet word with you about what you said the other day? You know, this, I just need to sort this out, kind of thing. In fact, it happened to me the other day with a neighbour who came round and just kind of, you know, almost demanded some inappropriate things. So I kind of thought about that, and I thought I need to go back to him this weekend and say that's just not on. You're not having it. It's as simple as that. Yeah. So because otherwise, what happens is, it's almost like a person gets one over on you, and then they do it again, and they do it again. So the key thing in these situations is not to react, but to respond. So yes. You process it, and then you come back later and say, look, you know, in a gentle way, I just need to say this. And then what's happened is you've released that energy, and it's gone back to the place it came from. It's called energetic exchange, and this is part of how the universe works. It works on law of reflection, which is all about exchange. And so if you allow the energy from one person to come into you all the time like that, this is how one person gains power over another person, and that's why the whole world is out of balance, basically. Sorry, Alan, go ahead.
No, it's all right. No, I was just going to say, that actually leads you back to that other person, your neighbour, hearing what you're saying. And it's about hearing and listening and taking on board what's actually going on and what's happening.
That's right, yeah. Yeah, let's all hear. Let's learn to hear. That's the key. It's learning to hear. And of course, we were speaking about truth, and what I was saying a minute ago was a lot of people don't actually want to hear the truth. So, you know, they cover it up. So I had a situation arise with relatives recently, where, you know, one relative spoke to me in you know, quite a nasty way, and there was no call for it at all. What she was doing was trying to exercise some power over something she wanted to change. So it was before Christmas, so I went away and I thought, I'm not having that. It's completely out of order. But I'm not going to say anything before Christmas and ruin the Christmas for them. So I thought, I'll wait. So I waited kind of 7 weeks, because I'd been away over Christmas for 6 weeks. Well, probably about 8 weeks. And then I just put it gently in a letter. And I put the truth, but it was gentle, but it was in writing. When you put something in writing, sometimes it goes off like a grenade when it hits their consciousness. And of course, what came back to me then was a reaction rather than a response. And so, you know, texts came into my phone, emails come in. I just deleted them all because they're reactions. And I thought, I'll just wait a few weeks, and then it'll calm down, and they'll be able to speak about the situation. And what they'll actually be able to see there is that they've broken an agreement that we had. But they couldn't see that at the time, so they couldn't hear the message at all. And of course, what comes up is your emotions, and then you can't hear the message. But so things are starting to change in that camp at the moment, and hopefully it'll all sort itself out soon. Of course, I'm not about creating wars with people, but you just have to tell people the truth sometimes in a gentle way. But of course, they don't want to hear it sometimes either.
Well, that's true, and excuse me. Also, you find that as you hit upon a minute or so ago, some people feel as if they can bully somebody else into submission, and then they feel as if they've, shall we use the word, won. But you see, that's on an individual basis. It's no different to what's actually going on in the Crimea at the moment. That's like a bullying situation. So whether it's one person against one or hundreds or thousands of people against each other, it's about who is the biggest bully in some ways.
Well, that's right, yeah. So America sent some jets over there today.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so what's the point? Why don't you just ignore it to a certain degree? You don't have to step it up all the time, because you get into this game then of, who's got the biggest ball kind of thing.
Yes.
But this is the old consciousness still acting itself out. The old consciousness is still in power, you see. And what the new consciousness has done is let go of power. The new consciousness has got its head down and it's just getting on with life, and it's going through the processes of creation, making new things, doing things in a new way. And it's like there's two completely different levels of consciousness functioning on the planet at the moment. You've got all the people who are awakening and getting on with stuff. I mean, if you look around, it's absolutely fantastic to see the amount of people today that are involved in creative pursuits. They're creating art, they're creating new ways of living, all kinds of things going on. New styles of houses, eco-friendly places, for example. And they're all doing this kind of under the radar of what's going on at a surface level, at a governmental level. And things that are going on at a governmental level are still following the same old paradigm, because that's where their consciousness is stuck at the moment. I mean, you cannot imagine our Prime Minister or leading politicians, for example, suddenly coming out and saying something completely different that hasn't been said before. They're still trotting out the same old stuff year after year after year. It doesn't matter which party is there, they trot out the same old thing over and over again.
It's very true, that is.
If you think about, the floods that we've had this past few months, and particularly the railway line that kind of got washed away down in Devon,
yes,
down at I can't think of the name, Dawlish. That's it, the Dawlish right. Warren. Yeah, which I used to fly kites on that beach at one time down there. So all you get is the talking, don't you? They all come out, we can't do this and we can't do that, and it's a big job. That railway line was built with men with picks and shovels. We didn't have machines in those days. They got the sleeves rolled up and built it.
Yes.
But even with all the equipment we've got these days, the issue always seems to be we can't do it for some reason or other, or we have to wait for this person to come and check it out first, rather than sending a gang down there. Send a gang of soldiers down there and say, okay, let's get some shuttering up against the sea, and let's start piling some cement and stone in here, and you should be able to have that railway back up and running in no time.
And that brings us back to people not hearing what's going on and not listening to the people that it affects.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, we know that government in this country has been kind of London-centric, really, for God knows how many years. The people in the countryside, they don't matter anymore, or matter very little, and the MPs that represent them out in the countryside, they don't really get their voices heard in Parliament. So I don't know what the answers are until you get that paradigm change in government where people start to listen and hear. In fact, if you remember, Alan, Somerset is still underwater, for example, all these months later. But no government ministers went down there till Prince Charles went down there. Exactly. He went to see the people, and then they all sort of jump on the bikes and race down there so as they don't look foolish.
And now it doesn't even come on the news now, and it's like people forget that all those people down there are still going through the horror of it all, because that's what it is. Their homes, livelihoods, everything has been ruined. But right. It doesn't make top news anymore.
No. It's not news, but it's still there. I actually saw a program about it last night, strangely enough, because I never watch news programs, or very, very rarely. But there was a program looking at the situation on the ground now, and it was talking to different farmers and this, that, and the other. And some of them are still under 3 or 4 feet of water. And the guy his son was there, and he said, maybe we'll have to grow rice, Dad. Turn it into a paddy field.
Yes.
But, you can laugh at that bit, but what the farmer was saying is, until this water goes, we don't know what we're left with. But certainly, things should be well on in the growth process now. We might not be able to grow anything at all this year. Now, if you lose a whole harvest like that from a country, that'll wake the government up, because all of a sudden there won't be enough food to go round.
Yes, that's true. And what ends up happening then is that things get imported and the prices go up, and then people then can't afford to live properly. Well, there's a lot of people still who can't afford to live properly now, and say, well, people listening to this show are saying, well, what's that got to do with listening and hearing? Well, it's to do with listening and hearing what people have got to say, the ones who are affected by it. And unfortunately, I suppose, it's probably much the same in other countries, that politicians, a lot of times, they just give lip service to it, and they only act when literally they're forced to.
Yeah, that's right. So where does that take us to?
Well, I think.
Have you been listening tonight?
I've been hearing you. I've been hearing you, Dave.
Very good.
Oh dear me.
There's definitely a difference.
Yes, there is a difference. There is.
Yeah.
There is. So yeah, I think sometimes what happens is that we get. We want to hear, we want to listen, but we also want to contribute. And sometimes you get situations where inside your mind, it's kind of semi-exploding. I've got to get this out, I've got to say that. And it isn't that you're not interested in what the other person's saying. It's almost like it becomes, totally understand that. I've got to say this because I understand what's being said, and I suppose the danger comes where the hearing and listening take secondary place to what you want to say, and I think what happens sometimes, like if you go onto TV debates and you get one side for something, one against something. And instead of sorting anything out, it just ends up in a shouting match. Yeah.
Well, on British TV, we have a programme called Question Time, which is quite a famous programme run by Mr. Dimbleby there. And I don't know how long that's been on the air now, but it must be 20, 30 years. It's been out there a long time, hasn't it, Alan?
Oh, it really has, yes.
Yeah. Well, I remember watching that, many, many years ago, watching a few sessions, and it's like you say, everybody stands up and gives their 10 penny. And I remember thinking one day at the end of this programme, I thought, nothing ever gets resolved. So it's a complete and utter waste of time listening to this programme, because nothing happens. And I stopped listening to it then. I've never listened to it since. Sometimes they have a radio version of it as well as the television. And if I'm in the car and it comes on, I just turn it off.
Same here.
It's an emotive thing. It gets people's emotions going. And it's the same old story of politicians, isn't it? I've got this view, you've got that view. We're never going to meet in the middle.
Yes, that's right.
And what we have to have is some compromise in the middle. And talking things out and saying, okay, well, we can't have it perfect your way, and we can't have it perfect your way. So what we're going to have to do is compromise and have it perfect somewhere in the middle. But until that actually happens, it's really a waste of time listening.
Well, strangely enough, our politics in this Parliament, we've got a coalition, and coalitions are famous for falling down in probably the first 6 months, and amazingly, it's still together after 4 years.
Yeah.
And is that a case of people are starting to hear and starting to listen?
Well, certainly it has lasted the course, hasn't it? There's a lot of internal squabble going on and a lot of broken promises, but it is still actually in one piece.
Please, yes.
So there's something to be said for it.
It'll be interesting. It'll be interesting in the next election what will happen there, because really, when you think about it, this Parliament has set total new precedents. Our country hasn't been governed like this properly before, so that'll be interesting. And then will the politicians hear what people are saying?
Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting to get to the day when that actually happens. I'll probably miss it because I don't listen to any of them. So I'm hoping somebody will tell me, and then I'll hear the message coming in. Right. So, listening and hearing. We're getting close to the end now, aren't we?
We've only got a couple of minutes, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's just go back to the great teachers. You know, I tend to work with the teachings of Jesus. That's what I was driven to find, to get close to those original teachings. And teachings are always given in metaphor, always. And what you have to do is, as you work on yourself and your consciousness shifts, you begin to see and hear the message within the teachings. So, you know, the message I would give to anybody on the spiritual path is just never stop working on yourself. And, you know, as Jesus says, never cease from seeking. Never cease. It's like you can't put your spade down for 5 minutes. You've got to work at it. And in that process, your consciousness will shift and you will eventually see the truth in the teachings. But
I'm ready to... I am sorry to cut across you, Dave, because we are virtually out of time, so we've got to start saying... Yeah. So we've got to say our good nights, basically. You know.
Right.
So do you quickly want to say your website again?
Yeah. www.emeraldheartlight.com will take you to the blog. And thanks for being with us tonight. And it's goodbye from me, Dave Ashworth.
And it's good night from me.
Good night.